It's really funny, it doesn't matter where you are in the world or if you've ever met a person before, as soon as you both realise that you enjoy football shirts, you can talk for ages. Hey guys, a warm welcome back to Phil's Corner and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about how to avoid collecting fatigue, how to avoid burnout as a collector. This is something which I've wanted to do for a little while now, and many of you will know that I quite enjoy a bit of a discussional video talking about the collecting experience, not just about all the exciting new shirts and the great old shirts, as good as they are, but talking about what it's like being a collector, sharing some tips, sharing some experiences. Hopefully this will be useful to you whether you are new to the football shirt space or whether you've been collecting for many years. So grab a cup of tea, grab a sofa like I've done here, sit back and relax. And thank you for your patience. We've not had a classic Phil's Corner video like this for a few weeks, but thank you for those who have tuned into the live streams. And indeed, most Tuesdays and Thursdays we're streaming here on the channel, so the details will be shared with subscribers if you are subscribed to the channel, so do that if you're not, and also share the schedule on Twitter or X. But yeah, thank you for tuning in to those streams, and indeed there's plenty more to come on this channel, so as I said, make sure you are subscribed. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to click the like button, and you can also leave a comment. And one of the things I like to do on these videos is that I like to answer some comments from the previous video, so that's what we're going to do now. We'll start with this comment from Lefree, who says, "What's wrong with the England collar? Aren't turtlenecks coming back in style?" And of course, lots of discussion about the international kits. We talked a bit about that in the last video and on some recent streams. I've ranked the international kits for the likes of Nike, Adidas and Puma, so do check out the recent Hot Wall streams if you want to see some more thoughts specifically on some of the kits. But just to comment on this from Lefree, I think the area of collars is one which has had a lot of debate, and I must say, you mentioned turtlenecks, Lefree. I actually think if we had more of a turtleneck look, I'd be all in. I remember seeing leaks for the recent Inter home shirt, so not this one, it was the previous season I believe. I'll show a picture up on screen, but some initial leaks of that kit had much more of a pronounced, prominent turtleneck, a much higher neck. The eventual kit had a little bit of that, but it wasn't kind of enough of a turtleneck for me. I kind of wanted more, so actually you mentioned that. I would really like to see that. I think in general, we've seen particularly Nike experiment with their collars this season. And I think on one hand, it's really good to see those ideas. Something like the boxed Nigeria collar was pretty audacious, but I kind of like seeing that experimentation. But I do think if we saw more of a turtleneck style, I'd be quite into it. It would be quite controversial, and I'm sure many of the players probably wouldn't like it as much. And indeed, a lot of fans wouldn't. So I don't think we're going to see it necessarily, but I would personally like to see more of a obvious turtleneck style. They'd have to probably justify it from a performance perspective to do that. But yeah, certainly collars, there's a lot that could be said about them, and particularly with the new international kits, lots of discussion and debate. It's fair to say that a lot of the new ones haven't landed so well, but at the same time, it's good to see some different ideas because it is a difficult area of a shirt to mix up year on year. And sticking with the theme of Nike, Duncan has a really interesting comment here. He says, "What's Nike's beef with England? They've not released a decent kit for the Three Lions since they took over the contract 10 or so years ago. Maybe it's the FA who dictate a minimalist style, but Nike have made some great international kits for other countries. France especially, he knows. So I don't understand these bland kits we keep getting." Now, it's really interesting, Duncan, because I do quite like looking at a brand's catalogue, performance if you like, for a particular team. And that zoomed out approach to me is quite interesting. But I would have a different take. I think looking at Nike's work with England, they've actually really, I would say, guided England into this modern era of kits that we're in now quite successfully. And I think actually a lot of recent England kits for both the men's and women's teams have been some of the better ones across international football. Certainly at the start of the tenure, so when Nike took over, it was fair to say it was quite traditional. There wasn't too much in the way of excitement. And I think it was always going to be hard following Umbro, who of course was so good and so loved with England. And the tailored by Umbro kits were so successful for Umbro, so I think it was always going to be tricky following that. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned the FA. That's an important point, particularly with international kits, but also with club sides, one thing which many people fail to recognise is that actually the federations do have so much say in terms of how daring a kit will be. So you see some nations stick very close to the status quo, sticking very close to what you would expect for a particular nation's kit. Other nations are much happier to push the boat out, to go really, really far from tradition. But I think you can see, even in Nike's time, the shift for the FA, when they went from being one of the more reserved sides in terms of kits to become one of the more progressive and daring sides when it came to kits. I think we can see that, and certainly the latest England away shirt speaks to that considerably, given the non-traditional colour scheme and the quite daring and I think quite successful design that they had there. So yeah, I do think it's an interesting thing to assess. I am personally quite a fan of the partnership. I think it really has grown. But yeah, that's a couple of comments there, and please again do feel free to ask any questions. It could be about the subject of today's video, it could be about anything else in the shirt world, or even something outside the football shirt world. Whatever it is, stick in the comments and I'll answer a bunch, as I say, at the start of the next episode. But let's dive into today's topic, and as I said at the start, this is going to be a bit of a discussional video, a bit of a chat about how to avoid collector fatigue, collector burnout. Now the football shirt world, the football shirt collecting world, is a really exciting one. Since I started collecting about 10 or so years ago, I was absolutely hooked, seeing the kind of things that you could pick up, these memories from your childhood, these little bits of material which evoked vivid memories of games and players and teams, places around the world. Being able to pick up these memories and have them as a collection was so exciting. And of course, as the interest in the hobby has grown, and certainly all my career now really has become focused on this, I've enjoyed it more and more, especially getting to meet other collectors, whether that's online or in person. I've made so many friends through here. Understandably, there's a lot of frustration online about the football shirt industry and the state of the industry, and there's a lot that could be said about that, which I would agree with. But at its core, I do think there is something really special which we are involved in here, and it's something which connects so many people. It's something which can be, I think, a really great outlet. But if we're honest with ourselves, it can be difficult. And again, it's not just the frustrations with the industry as a whole which can rise. Sometimes you can feel really isolated as a collector, and particularly when you're spending a lot of time online, there are a lot of dangers. There are even serious financial implications where you can get stuck in a rut between buying more and more shirts and not really having an end goal. There is an addictive element to this. There is certainly the potential for things to spiral out of control. And quite simply, you can just feel burnt out. You can just feel like, I don't really know why I'm doing this. But I wanted to do this video just to share some experiences, just to share some tips from my own journey, and hopefully there's something you can take from this. I've got 5 broad headings to talk about, which we'll go through one by one. And you guys know me, I like to talk a bit, so we will probably go around the houses with these subjects. We'll start with my first point, which I think is a huge one, perhaps the biggest one actually, of all the points today. And that is to find enjoyment in your current collection. Now, as a football shirt collector, you've probably got a bunch of shirts in your wardrobe, in your chest of drawers. And whether you've got a small collection of just a dozen or so shirts, or you've got hundreds of football shirts, there's always a desire to want to add to that collection. It's part of the enjoyment of collecting, is seeing those new deliveries, seeing things come in, getting to wear them, photograph them, make videos about them, whatever it is that you do with your football shirts. But one thing which can easily get lost, again, no matter the size of your collection, is to actually appreciate what you already have. And this is something which I've really enjoyed trying to do, and I still have to try because it isn't always easy. Again, the excitement of a new shirt is always going to be there, but I think there's something to be said about going to your wardrobe again and picking out that shirt and just enjoying it, almost as if it was the first time you received it. I can't tell you how many shirts I have forgotten that I've had in my collection. It's kind of crazy, isn't it, right? But you can buy a shirt, take photos of it, wear it, whatever it is you do again, and then a year later, you're looking through your wardrobe or the box of shirts that you got, whatever it is, and you realise, I forgot I had that shirt. And the other funny thing about collecting football shirts is that as the years go on, shirts which were maybe kind of fairly run-of-the-mill at the time you bought them become more and more desirable. So actually, that shirt you bought from 2018, say, actually has a little bit more about it now in 2024. Dare I say it, some people would even call it a throwback or a vintage shirt, wouldn't they? But yeah, I do think there's so much to be said about enjoying what you have, enjoying the collection that you have, because it's not about the size of your collection or just always adding more and more and more. Actually, if you've got a collection of football shirts that you enjoy, that's kind of the end of the story. There will always be someone with a bigger collection, a better collection, a more expensive collection than yours, but you can enjoy what you have, because even if you've just got a couple of shirts, that is a privileged position to be in. Without wanting to get too philosophical, if you can just have any sort of collection, if you have that disposable income to be able to buy a football shirt in the first place, you're in an incredibly privileged position. And I'm saying this to myself, of course, as I speak to you guys. Some people would love to own even one football shirt, let alone have a collection. So take time to enjoy the shirts you already have. Just spend a few minutes every so often going through and looking what you have, enjoying what you have, having those memories flood back as you look through the different kits that you already own. The second tip is a very practical one, and that is quite simply to limit the number of new purchases that you make. Now, I think it's a good practice, again, no matter what sort of collector you are, to set some sort of limit. And this is hardly rocket science. I think many people would think about this, but I would definitely encourage you to set limits, because I think it helps sharpen your focus, your decision making as a collector. This could be done in a number of ways. It could be that you have a budget, and many people would have some sort of idea of a rough amount that they'd be happy to spend for a shirt. But if you stick to a stricter budget, it's going to help you in those decisions. So for example, say you have a budget of kind of 50 quid a month, right? So what's that, 600 quid in a year? That's quite a lot of money, but actually that can easily be gobbled up if you were just to buy shirts as and when, and as soon as you see a shirt you like, you bought it. By the time you buy a couple of special edition shirts and a couple of shirts in the sale, you can easily exhaust that £600 in the space of just a few months. But by setting a budget, you can be much more strategic. So when it comes to the new releases in the summer, there's always an excitement around those new kits, but more often than not, those same kits will be available later in the year, around this time of year even. The end of season sales will start, and those same shirts will be available for much less. But having a budget helps you to make those decisions. It helps you to say, okay, let's say you get to July, okay, and the new kits are coming out, and you spend £200, £300 maybe off that £600 budget. Suddenly you can start to think, okay, whilst I really like that shirt for £100, that new shirt, actually I could get a vintage shirt for my collection for that same price and wait for that new shirt next year. So things like a budget can really help. It could also be a case of saying, okay, I want to collect a dozen shirts this year, 12 shirts this year. And I think the way to approach these sorts of limits that you place on yourself as a collector is to see them for your benefit. If you didn't have these limits, if you didn't have these kind of guidelines for yourself to kind of say, okay, I want to collect X number of shirts, or I want to spend no more than this amount of money, it would be very easy for things to spiral out of control. Before you know it, what could have been a £600 budget has been £1,200, and you don't know where that money's gone. And actually, the enjoyment that you get from all these new purchases is heavily tempered, if not completely wiped out, by the frustration of having spent far more than you wanted to spend. Even if it's not a specific limit, I think just approaching every month almost afresh and saying, okay, what did I spend last month? How many new shirts did I add? And that kind of constant self-assessment is really helpful, and it helps avoid those traps you get into where you just don't look at all at your spending and what you're adding. And if you never look at that, if you just always blindly buy more and more and more, spend more and more and more without any kind of break on the situation, it can get really dangerous. It can really get quite unhealthy. So set some limits. Again, there's all sorts of ways to do that, but it will really help you in your collecting journey. The third way you can avoid collector fatigue is to carve your own path. And what do I mean by carving your own path? Well, there are many ways to enjoy football shirts, and sometimes it can feel like there is only one way. Sometimes it can feel like you need to collect the most popular shirt. You need to get this deal because it is the best price this shirt is ever going to be. And it's very easy to go along with the crowd, and suddenly your collection looks exactly the same as someone else's. But one of the best things about being a collector is that you can be really individual about it. You can collect shirts that you like, and maybe you're the only person in the world that likes a shirt. But if it means something to you, if you enjoy it, that's really special. Now, there's nothing wrong with picking up on a deal because it is a great deal, seeing someone buy a shirt and wanting to buy the same shirt. But I think with this point, I would really encourage you to find that area of the massive football shirt world, find that slice of the pie that really speaks to you. Maybe it's a particular brand, maybe it's Mizuno. You really enjoy Mizuno kits. You might say, okay, I want to collect a selection of Mizuno kits from over the years. And the great thing about that is that can become your focus, that can become where you put a lot of your energy into. And it means that you'll probably say no to some other brands potentially, but it's a great way again of focusing your collection, really helping you again with knowing what to pick up, what to say no to. And we can really talk about FOMO here because again, as I've just mentioned, it can be easy to see people talking about a shirt and thinking, I need to get this because if I don't buy this now, I'll never get the shirt again. I think anytime you find yourself asking that question, pause, stop. There are no football shirts which simply have to be picked up at all costs. That just simply isn't the case. It doesn't matter how good a deal is. It doesn't matter how good the shirt is. If you can afford it, great. And if you're able to do that with no impact on other areas of your life and other things which are more important, that's fine. But as soon as you find yourself buying a shirt, even though you realise that you don't need the shirt or actually that you don't want the shirt, or even worse, that buying the shirt will have an impact on things like paying your bills. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I know I've been in that situation before and I'm sure some of you have as well. When you've said to yourself at the start of the month, I'm not going to buy a football shirt, and then you see something and you like it so much that you start to justify it. Because this is what we do, and this is just a human thing, isn't it? It's just a human problem that we will jump through all sorts of hoops to justify something. And it's important to step back, to take a deep breath and think, okay, actually, if I don't have this football shirt, it's going to be okay. And there's so much to be said about when you're spending time online and when you're spending time on social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram. You're seeing everyone's new kits, you're seeing all these amazing purchases. And whilst it might feel like every collector is buying a shirt, actually the vast majority of collectors haven't bought that shirt. You're just seeing the ones that have. Many more collectors have said no to a shirt. You're never going to be the odd one out, even if it is an amazing deal, even if it is a very popular shirt. And it's great. I love being on Twitter particularly and spending time seeing new kits getting shared from around the world, old kits which I've never seen before. I love that about the hobby. It does also mean that there are many shirts that I want to buy, but you have to be selective and find those little avenues. It doesn't mean you have to define your entire collection. So I really like Boca Juniors shirts, but I haven't set a limit on only buying Boca Juniors shirts. Though that's something I've definitely considered, but that's something I really enjoy. And actually, for recent years, I've kind of thought, okay, I want to buy one Boca Juniors shirt from each season. So not every one, not the home, away and third, but kind of at least one of those. For recent seasons, and I've tried to backdate my collection as well. That's just a fun kind of long-term goal, and that's kind of one little avenue that I've gone down, one little path that I've tried to carve. And there's a few other things. I quite like Hummel shirts. There's a few other teams as well that I'm partial to. But yeah, carve your own path. And I think when it comes to FOMO as well, recognise that there are so many ways to go about this hobby. Don't feel like you need to have a shirt. You need to have a Holland 88 shirt, otherwise you're not a real collector. No one's going to say that, but it can feel like that sometimes when it comes to certain shirts. You'll only end up frustrated if you go down that train of thought. Number 4 is to think less about value and numbers. Now this builds on some of our thinking on previous points, but when it comes to football shirts, it can be a really healthy thing not to be too preoccupied with the value of those shirts. Now, any collecting hobby has an element of this, and actually one of the things that I really enjoy is finding a deal on eBay, say a really good price on a vintage shirt, and using profits from an eventual sale of that shirt to fund new purchase. And I really enjoy that, and though it's much harder to do that now given the interest in the hobby and given the amount of people who are now buying shirts, it can still be done. I've still done that quite a lot, and that's one way which I help fund new purchase, as I say. But as I've been doing this for several years, I've come to realise that sometimes you're going to make a loss, and sometimes actually if you sell a shirt, which let's say you bought it for 80 quid and you sell it for 60 quid, that could be a much better thing than say waiting for that shirt to be sold for 100 quid plus and never ever selling it. Now of course if you're running a business you can kind of discount some of the thinking that I've got here, but I think as an individual collector I talk all the time about selling shirts to buy new shirts. For me that is a really great approach. Now I don't think everyone has to do that, and many people will never sell their collection, they will only add to it. That works for some people, but I think actually for a lot of people, particularly those who don't have as much disposable income, it's a really great thing to buy a shirt, and maybe you've worn it, maybe you've not worn it, maybe it's been hidden away, zipped up, locked up in an airtight cupboard. It can be a great thing to then sell that shirt, maybe at the price you pay for it, maybe for a profit, or maybe for less than you bought it for, in order to get a new kit. I quite enjoy that. For me, it's allowed me to simply have a lot more shirts in my hands, to see a lot more shirts in person. And on this point, I don't think you should completely discount the financial side of the hobby. Indeed, I think one of the great things about kits is that you can buy a shirt, and broadly speaking, over time it will generally go up in value. And I think it's really cool to think in 10, 20, 30 years time, if I still have my collection, that same collection will be worth a lot more money. That's a really cool thought. But I think ultimately that should never be the primary motivator, the primary factor behind purchases, behind sales. I think being able to kind of accept a loss on the sale of a shirt, for example, particularly if that can then help fund new purchases, it's a really healthy way to help avoid fatigue and burnout. So our fifth and final point was just to share the hobby as much as possible with other people. Now, I mentioned trading, and this is something which I really think is quite special. If you're able to meet fellow collectors online, and of course many of you have probably already done this, there are a few better things than being able to share stories about your collecting journey and even to swap shirts. And this is one thing which I think can really, again, help avoid those feelings of burnout, help avoid those feelings of fatigue. It's a great thing to remember. The world is much bigger than you. The world is much bigger than just your collection. Actually, there are many other people enjoying this too. And that's such an important thing. One of my favourite things which I've had the privilege of doing is being able to meet some of you in person for a coffee and meet fellow collectors and just chat and just enjoy the fact that actually this hobby does bring people together, and there's that special bond that we have as football shirt enthusiasts. It's really funny, it doesn't matter where you are in the world or if you've ever met a person before, as soon as you both realise that you enjoy football shirts, you can talk for ages. I can think of someone I met at church recently, and this was someone I never met before, but they heard that I worked in this world of football shirts, and they talked about being a collector themselves, and we were chatting for ages. I'd never met this person before, but it's so fun to be able to have that connection. And there are great stories, aren't there, when you go on holiday and you're wearing a football shirt and you catch the eye of someone else who's wearing a kit and you just smile, you nod to each other. And it sounds cheesy, but it does happen. It does happen more than you'd expect. But I think getting back to the essence of what makes this hobby so enjoyable, it isn't about how big your football shirt collection is. It isn't about the monetary value of your kits. And you can get really creative with how you share your collection, how you talk about your collection. Maybe start a YouTube channel like this, or maybe you have a page dedicated to your kits. And I'd encourage you, don't be afraid to do that. And again, even if your collection is quite small, even if it's not an amazing collection, that's okay. If anything, when you find those paths that you carve yourself, those areas, those slices of the pie that you really want to dedicate time to, being able to share that love can be really exciting. There are many people in the community who do this, who collect a certain type of shirt, and they kind of get known for collecting those types of shirts, and that's really great. Embrace and encourage that community aspect of the hobby, and I think this is really the biggest point, and the point I want to end on. There is strength in the community, there is strength in sharing your hobby. And when it comes to all the things we talked about, things like deciding on new purchases, things like trying to find your identity as a collector, things like not getting stuck into the trap of thinking about shirts purely as a profit making avenue, community is really the biggest answer to this. And ultimately, when we're talking about things like avoiding fatigue and avoiding burnout, these are things to share with other people. This is kind of like a 5B, or maybe even a separate point to our fifth point. Find people you can talk to. Maybe it's a friend who doesn't collect shirts, or maybe it is another collector online, whoever it is, who you can be honest with, you can talk about, again, the highs and lows of collecting. Sometimes the conclusion might be that you do need to take a step back, and sometimes actually, when you feel that fatigue begin to set in, take a step back, turn off your phone, take yourself away from that. It can be the best thing you can do. But sometimes actually one of the best things to do is to go online and talk about things with other people, share the hobby again, get back to what makes this hobby so enjoyable. So there's a few thoughts there. I'll recap from 1 to 5. Number 1 was to find enjoyment in your current collection. Number 2 was to limit yourself with new purchases. Number 3 was to carve your own path. Number 4 was to think less about value and numbers. And number 5 was to share the hobby as much as possible. But I would really love to hear from you guys in the comments. What are some of the things you do to avoid fatigue? What are some of the ways you have avoided burnout as a football shirt collector? Let me know. I would really love to hear. It'd be really helpful to hear your experiences. And I hope something has been useful to you. Maybe it's just one point of today. If I've been of any help to you, then this video has been successful. But thank you for watching, guys. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you very soon for the next video. Take care.